Falque-Pierrotin, thank you very much for doing this. This is a big day. This is day one.
Yeah, enormous day.
Is it? How is it working? Is it working? Is there a difference? Can you feel it? I ask this question because I clicked through the new menus on Facebook and Instagram. It took 30 seconds. My behavior has not changed. Facebook's behavior has not changed. I, as a consumer, cannot yet feel the difference.
Yeah, but the culture is changing. The culture.
The culture.
You know, the importance of the data protection issue, which almost four years ago, nobody was interested. Look at today. So many people in the room interested to hear about the GDPR. This is a major change. And so, of course, we're ready and we're going to discuss this, but the major change is the cultural change.
Okay, but I thought the entire purpose of GDPR was not so much a cultural change, it was more a legal change, because this law has real teeth. Some of the larger tech companies could be fined billions of dollars, right? It's 4% of global revenue?
Yeah, it is a major change in legal framework, as you say, and I would say Europe has a strong political message to the world somehow by saying that the digital society should be organized around the end user, around the individuals. It is the individuals who should make the choice, you know, in this digital society. And so the legal framework of Europe comes at the right moment to answer to these new social expectations of the people, not to get rid of all these services, but to be in a position of control.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned the idea that some people think we should get rid of these services. Some companies have said they will stop doing business in Europe because of this law. What is the cost of GDPR in terms of, in terms of jobs and companies and people feeling like France and the rest of Europe and London are good places to work?
I think this is a very short-sighted impression. GDPR is very good for business, is very good for European companies for at least three main reasons. First, for the first time, all these European companies will have one unique law. We are creating the integrated data market in Europe. This is good for business, I guess. The second reason why it's good for business, it's exactly what I was saying beforehand. It is because the GDPR brings a legal framework that brings confidence, that brings trust to the digital society. And since the Snowden revelation with Cambridge Analytica, with all the leaks, we know that there is this pervasive mistrust in the digital society. And the GDPR, through the new rights of the individuals, through the new obligations of the company, through the higher credibility of regulation because of the higher fines, bring this trust. And the third advantage for business in the GDPR, it is of course to equalize the competition conditions between European and non-European companies. Until now, today, when we are discussing with a company that is not established in Europe, this company always says, oh, all the obligations of the EU directive doesn't apply to me. And on the same side, the European actors are saying to us, you are imposing very high legal constraints to us, but not to the foreign companies. This debate with the GDPR is closed. Why is it closed? It's because a company will be submitted to the GDPR, even if she's not established in Europe, once it is offering goods or services targeted to European people in Europe.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and this is very important.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned that, because this is what Americans think, that Europe is bad at innovation but good at regulation. Is this not an example of that? This kind of, I don't believe this criticism, but the tech industry is heavily based in California, and they see Europe as often, they see Europe, it's a stereotype, but they see Europe as a drag. They see us as the people who put weights on tech, who prefer to regulate tech than let the market figure this out. Are the Americans wrong?
You're right, regulation must be sensible. We don't want to impose any artificial obligations if there is no value added related to these obligations. But the GDPR choice is to say, we will build in Europe an innovation that is really sustainable, robust, if it is based on a robust legal framework, respecting the individuals. And I guess it's a good bet. It's a good bet because in quasi all the countries, you have these new expectations of the market, which is, how can I control my data? Who is using this data? For what purpose? Can I say yes or no? And so I think believing that innovation can totally escape from any legal rules, this is a very unrealistic thing. Remember the Google Glass. Google Glass, this innovation was launched by Google without any privacy, I would say, assessment. And after a short period of time, it was suppressed by Google because there were so many negative reactions that it was bad for business.
Well, it was discontinued by Google in large part because there was very little take-up. That's a good example, surely, of the market figuring out that no one wants this product.
Maybe also it was the case.
Okay. You mentioned earlier that GDPR creates a new market. That's an interesting idea. Tell us how you think GDPR will create a new market.
Well, I think GDPR believes that trust is a good levy. You know, trust is a factor for business. Labor, investment, but also trust is a good levy for business. And we can see around us in France, but I guess in other countries, that startups, more mature companies are investing in data protection in order to develop an argument towards their customers, towards their investors, and more companies are using this competitive advantage argument. And I believe it's true. We had this in mind at the CNIL level for 4 or 5 years, and it was difficult to be heard 4 years ago. Now, when I go and visit companies, I often hear this argument. I was a few weeks ago with an investment funds, you know, it's not the type of actors we usually deal with at the CNIL level. And these people were very much interested to say we should integrate this type of criteria in the choice of our investments. So no, I believe it's more and more a competitive argument.
Okay, the Cambridge Analytica scandal at Facebook really seems to have changed everything. That really has, in my opinion, changed the culture. And it used to be that the large American tech companies were essentially in control of all our data, no matter where we lived. And, you know, 2 years ago, I think the idea of GDPR was regarded with a lot of skepticism in America. But now, because of Cambridge Analytica, people have woken up a bit more about their data and their privacy and how it is sold and how it may be used and abused. Do you think that GDPR will cause a shift in power from America to Europe?
You're right.
In terms of data and privacy? Does it move more of the power towards us?
Well, I think what is paradoxical is that the major European initiative in data protection has been not caused, but at least helped by 2 major things: Snowden revelation, 2011, Cambridge Analytica. And these 2 factors have helped so much the GDPR, first to be prepared and voted, and second, today, to be known. Will it bring some change in the balance of forces between Europe and the United States? We hope so. We hope so, because the GDPR is a way for Europe to affirm, to strengthen its identity as regards data protection. And it is also a means for Europe to bring a comprehensive answer to one of the most critical issues of the century. You know, everything now is related to data. Yeah. Digital innovation, individual behaviors, we speak of a data-driven society. All of us, we believe that data protection probably is a bit too short. The GDPR wants to replace somehow the data protection by a real data governance, which means re-engineering the power relationship around the data, power relationship between individuals and companies, power relationship within the companies as regards data, how data is treated within the companies, power relationship in between the DPAs, cooperation between the national DPAs, and power relationship between Europe and the rest of the world. So this is a strong thing.
Okay. I want to move on now to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and algorithms. And CNIL produced a report. I think the title of it was, Can Humans Keep the Upper Hand? And one of the interesting proposals in the report is the idea that there should be a requirement for fairness and ethics inside algorithms, and that there should be transparency around algorithms. Can you talk a little bit about that? How practically would you require a company or a startup to make sure its algorithms are fair, and how would you enforce that? I love the idea that there should be a requirement for an algorithm to be fair, but I can't see how in the free market you're going to make that logistically work.
Well, actually, it's the start of a reflection and of a conversation. What we believe is that artificial intelligence somehow has replaced big data. You know, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, everybody was speaking about big data. Now it's artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is carrying what people are fearing, which is being a black box. Yeah. And so the idea is, if we want artificial intelligence really to develop, then again the black box should open and should give guarantees. So we imagined 2 new principles. They are not legal principles, but maybe they are methodological principles, the fairness principles and the vigilance principles. What we believe is that algorithm and artificial intelligence, it's not one actor, it's usually a chain. And the chain should be somehow co-responsible of the positive, but also of the negative effects of the use of these artificial intelligent tools. Then the question is, how do you make this? As I said, this is the beginning of the conversation. And
because if I'm a company and I have a fantastic new algorithm, the last thing I want to do is have it exposed, make it transparent, because I do not want my competitors to see how this algorithm works. Google, for instance, the entire basis of Google is that almost nobody understands exactly how the search engine works.
Yeah, but I mean, being transparent doesn't mean to offer all the secret of the companies to the general public. It means that if you are taking a decision towards somebody with the use of an algorithm, you should be in a position to explain under which criteria this decision has been taken, so that the individual could understand what's going on. You should also be in a position to optimize your choice, but maybe to be conscious of the possible negative effects of the use of the algorithm. I give you an example. You look at a hospital. A hospital is using an algorithm to manage the beds. According to the algorithm, the people having such illness should be out of their beds, out of the hospital in 2 days. But maybe they should say 3 days to have a better public health.
Yeah.
Because 2 days it's too short for the person. So the idea of fairness of the algorithm is to take into account not only the direct effect to the direct user of the algorithm, but maybe the sort of collective effects also of the algorithm. But as I said, artificial intelligence is an international debate.
Yeah.
I'm chairing the International Conference of Privacy Authorities, and we have chosen artificial intelligence as the theme of the year. And so we also are going to discuss this at the international level. And I think it's going to be very interesting.
Okay. We only have a couple more minutes. You led an investigation into Google surrounding privacy that led initially to a fine of 150,000 euros. And that in turn there have been several investigations and inquiries into Google. Most recently, Google was fined, I think, 2 billion for antitrust violations. And now, today, we have GDPR on its first day, where a company can be fined 4 billion, well, I think it's 4% of global revenues, which for Google is billions of dollars. And my question for you is, you go to meetings at Google, like you walk into the room and talk to their lawyers. Are they nice to you?
They're more interested by us than they were in 2014 or 2015. I think Google at the beginning, and I don't want to point out to Google, any of these companies like 4 years ago, they were not really interested by us because they believed they had a global service and whatever the local conditions, they will develop the service, whatever. Today, they are realizing that Europe has a specificity. Then when they are operating in Europe, when they are coming to Europe, they should respect European law.
What was the moment where you saw the change happen inside Google, when you sat across the table from those Google executives? When did you see them change? When did you see them sit up and take notice because they realized this was actually going to be very serious and very expensive?
I think there's no real moment where this type of change happened. What I can say is that now all these companies are facing a European regulatory ecosystem composed by national DPAs, now acting together, having the possibility to co-decide in front of them, which is a very important change. They're facing also European courts that are more and more aware of these new questions. So the balance, again, of forces has changed.
Okay. Are there any companies that have a really good approach to privacy? Can you name any companies that the people in our audience here might look to as an example of people who are getting it right, setting a standard?
It's very difficult in front of all these audience to name any companies. There will be too many.
We'll just name 3.
French companies.
French, international?
Well, I would, of course, name French companies, as I'm French. I would name Quant, you know, as a search engine. I would name a very more tiny company called Cozy Cloud. You know Cozy Cloud? Data portability and respecting data protection privacy. And I would name maybe a more mature company, Doctolib or BlaBlaCar, because these type of companies that are more mature, but they are, I think they have understood that data protection was not a cost, but an investment.
Right. And BlaBlaCar is very affected by regulation in many different country markets. And unfortunately, we have run out of time. But thank you very much for coming to talk to us today. Ladies and gentlemen, the woman who is responsible for GDPR.